Welcome back, everyone. We certainly hope you have benefited from the last sessions that were critically important as we move toward the end of our conference on Friday, relative to a manifesto, declaration, and next steps. We had the fine opportunity to hear from experts and moderation relative to the fourth industrial revolution, the digital age. And yes, there was some discussion relative to the critical issue we'll be discussing now. And that is the issue of climate change. I dare say climate change and climate justice, particularly in this space of people of Africa and of African descent. We are moving toward a resolve of how do we move forward. Climate change is critical to moving forward as we address our agenda going forward. It was mentioned even on Saturday with the Pan-African women, was mentioned by the president, the former president of South Africa, and the minister who represented the current president of South Africa. It's been mentioned relative to reparatory justice, and today it's been mentioned relative to an equitable international order as we move forward. So I hope you are helping to find your way relative to the chat and other places of input, because that is why we've gathered. We have gathered to find the synergy and the movement toward where do we go after the conference. So thank you so much for coming back. I hope you've had your coffee, your tea, or whatever has given you refreshment for the journey in this moment. As I've said, people of Africa and of African descent are on the front lines of climate change. And therefore, we have to be leaders of climate justice in this space. We understand that we are the frontliners. And many of us happily are already speaking to the historic inequities. Of course, 1945 and the Congresses, the Pan-African Congresses have always spoken to this. And of course, we've always spoken to this even over 100 years ago. But now we understand that these underlying historic issues now contribute to our being disproportionately affected by climate change. From drought, increased fires, famine, expansion of deserts, and other consequences, we know that conflict, disgruntlement, and anger with ineffective governance are not the only reasons why our people move. Climate change is also a catalyst. COP26 is just around the corner. In fact, it would have just already begun its pre-conferencing. And some of you are already on your way to Glasgow, Scotland, for that timely conversation of the nations of the world. We are very honored that there will be at least one or two members on this panel who is on the way to COP26. This moment of the 26th annual conferencing around this critical issue. Again, that will be held in Scotland. So this conversation comes even as we prepare ourselves for the global conversation that is ours, where most of our nations will be represented in this space. Civil society matters, governance matters. And so we hope with whatever you hear today, that you will be advocates, yes, climate justice leaders in this space for a more equitable world as we think about a more equitable international order. So today, without further ado, it is certainly my joy, it is my honor to welcome our speakers for today. I would like to introduce them to you just to get a sense of the breadth of who is here in the room. We are very blessed to have Ms. Imira. Imira is there, yes? I didn't see her there for a moment, but we have Ms. Imira Woods who is there. She's with SHINE. She's also a colleague that I work with on issues around advocacy of Africa. She is a scholar. She is called upon regularly in the media space to give comment on these issues that we'll be discussing on this time together. We also welcome her because she also is in the middle of her various work around advocacy with SHINE. So we thank her for what she's doing in that space. We also welcome the Reverend James Bhagwan. And Reverend Bhagwan is the leader of the Pacific Conference of Churches. Some of you were with us just the other day where we confirmed and affirmed our kinship with the Pacific, and particularly with Papua and Vanuatu and Solomon Islands and Fiji. Well, Reverend Bakwan is a leader in the Pacific in the ecumenical space. And yes, he is on his way to COP26. And so we will look forward to his comments as he speaks about issues around migration, also in the Pacific space, but even globally as he goes on to COP26. We also welcome today our very special guest who is coming to us. Just one moment. I seem to have lost. One moment, please. One moment. Yes, we also welcome today a special guest who is coming to us, Ms. Bricky, I believe it is. And she is Jessica Bricky. She comes with also a strong background relative to issues around climate and also around issues of migration, particularly around issues of migration. And she will speak in her own way around her expertise relative to migration. We also bring to you Mr. Vasquez Gonzalo, who will also come and speak about the intersection about these two issues relative to migration patterns and climate change. Let us begin with Mr. Gonzalo, who will give us a very, everyone, as they know, have up to 10 minutes, by the way, to speak. So we're going to have to stay close to this time in order to honor the time frame that is limited. So Mr. Gonzalo, let's come with you, and then we'll go to our next speaker. Please, the floor is yours. Hello, is your microphone? You need to unmute. Well, oh, there you are. Yes, we can't hear you. I'm sorry. Maybe we have a technical problem. I'm sorry, we can't hear him just now. Let us go to Reverend Bakwan and come back to you to see if we can settle the technology issues. Reverend Bakwan, can you please come?
Thank you, Angelique, and thank you all for this opportunity. Greetings to you all from a very long road to COP26, currently in Geneva. Our Pacific communities are voyaging people. And thousands and thousands of years ago, long before the European conquest of the Pacific, long before the birth of Christianity, our Pacific ancestors were voyaging this great ocean that covers 1/3 of the world. And as Angelique says, we are a journeying people. We are a migratory people. We have come, however, over thousands of years to settle and call the Pacific our home. And yet this home that is ours, the blue Pacific continent, is really under threat from the impact of climate change, just as it has been in the past from the impact of nuclear testing for the last half decade, or half century rather, after the Second World War. In the context of climate change, and I thank you, Angelique, for raising some of the obvious impacts that we see across the world. And while we in the Pacific face the issue of rising sea levels and the ocean acidification, we recognize that all across the world there are symptoms of climate change. There's climate disaster happening everywhere. Some is slow onset and some are rapid onsets. In the Pacific, we face not only rising sea levels and saltwater inundation on our coastal and island communities, we face the extreme weather situations of extreme high category cyclones and hurricanes, and droughts and floods as well. And we recognize that The impact in our region is also being felt by our sisters and brothers in the Caribbean, our sisters and brothers in Africa as well, in America. And it is predominantly those in the more disadvantaged communities that experience these first because of the places that they have found themselves located. But if I can just share from the Pacific perspective very quickly, to share on how we are experiencing this situation as something that is a matter of existence for us. Our Pacific people have a deep spirituality, as many of our indigenous people around the world do, and a deep spiritual connection with land, with place, and with ocean. And that means that any impact on the land and on the sea is something not just in terms of socio-political implications, but has deep, significant implications on how we live. And we are now starting to see, and we have begun to, in fact, prepare and relocate communities that are being displaced from the coast because of rising sea levels. So we are not talking about what's going to happen in 2030, in 2050, in 2100. We are talking about what is already happening to our communities today. These are extremely traumatic experiences for people to be uprooted from a place where they have for now many, many generations, over 3 millennia, placed their roots in the ground. And they're being forcibly uprooted by the lack of action of many of our developed countries to reduce their carbon emissions. The challenge that we face is, how do we respond to that? How do we provide care and support? And who pays for the cost of these relocations? We have some who will have to relocate to their own land, further inland or upland, as we say. We have those who may have to negotiate with other tribes and communities for land. But we also have communities who will lose their entire nation as a result of sea level rise. And I speak here of our island atolls such as Kiribati and Tuvalu. We have the Marshall Islands, the Micronesian communities that are also facing this as well. And the challenge of losing not just indigenous identity, cultural and spiritual connections, and that alienation that takes place, but the issue of the loss of sovereignty, to lose and become stateless almost in this context of climate change. And so the decisions that are going to be made at COP26, the negotiations that take place, the grand ambitions that will be announced are of course very important. But what we are calling for is really to make sure that these announcements have real teeth to them, a real, not just fat, but they have the muscle, the bone, the sinew to make action take place. And this is about engaging with our communities. Climate change is going to reduce this, basically the land space that is inhabitable on the earth, either by rising sea levels, by increasing desertification, and droughts, etc. And this is going to place immense pressure on the human community. If we do not do something now, tomorrow may be too late. And so this is an urgent matter of life and death, a matter of existence that has brought me from my Pacific Island home, where my family is, to journeying through this COVID spotted world to Glasgow, to advocate for our people and for what you rightly call climate justice. I'll leave it there, and I will look forward to answering questions and responses as we go on. So thank you so much, Angelique, and to the organizers for this opportunity.
Well, and thank you, Reverend Bhagwan, and we're so glad that you could join us live despite your travels in this moment from Geneva, Switzerland to Glasgow. Thank you so much. I would like to now again say a word about Ms. Brieke, Jessica Brieke. She's an associate lecturer at the School of Electoral and Information Engineering at the University of the Wits, or Wits University, as many of us called, which is done, where she lectures on interdisciplinary courses on sociology and technology. She has explored questions of responsive and responsible technology, And she has worked as a researcher for the South African Labor and Development Research Unit and the Human Science Research Council. She's just finished articles in the Journal of Moral Education and the Oxford Handbook for Global South Youth Studies. She has co-authored Moral Eyes, Youth and Justice in Cameroon, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, South Africa with the HSRC Press in 2018. She is a Mandela Rhodes Scholar and a Chevening Scholar. In 2021, with the support of the Sean Johnson Memorial Scholarship, Ms. Jessica has now been invited to pursue her PhD in geography at UCL, where she will try to better understand the movement of African migrants across the Mediterranean. And she hopes to move beyond critiques of toxic humanitarianism and think about how we can start to build alternative infrastructures of solidarity. Ms. Bricky, the floor is yours, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you, Rev, for going before me. And I was really struck by kind of your focus on water and people's connection to water. So I am pursuing doctoral research that is looking at migration, not in the Pacific, but across the Mediterranean, specifically on small boats. So my research focuses on the role of the boats in rescue, of the rescue boats, the NGO rescue boats, and really more specifically, the use of the word rescue. So it really is a critique of kind of toxic humanitarianism. And, you know, when we speak about rescue from a humanitarian perspective, we eliminate a lot of the political factors, right? We think of something as a humanitarian crisis, like the climate change, like migration, and we don't think of it as a man-made political crisis. And so I think what I'm trying to do in my research is connect these political factors to this kind of humanitarian discourse that already exists, and to push back against that. So when I was preparing for this discussion today, I was thinking about what I would say, and the thing that kept coming to my mind was the novel Gun Island by Amitav Ghosh. And it was interesting because I kind of kept pushing it aside. And I was like, well, I can't, you know, speak in this forum referring to a novel. I need to think about more rigorous evidence and, you know, put forward more kind of empirical research. But I think as we kind of move towards this climate catastrophe, the novel as a form of writing, as a form of literature, is increasingly relevant to how we understand what is going on, right? And so Gun Island is a brilliant novel, and it really is this tying together of migration, of climate change, of borders, of injustice, of the planet, of animals, and it connects all these things in quite a beautiful way. But it is obviously a novel, right? It is not connected to reality in the way that perhaps more rigorous empirical research is. But our understanding of reality is becoming so disjointed because the climate catastrophe is just creating so many issues that we've just never seen before, right? This idea of fleeing something that is no longer inhabitable. And Achille Mbembe opened up this conference on Sunday, and Prof. Mbembe has this notion that he talks about of life futures, right? The life futures of the world in which we live, and how the world is increasingly becoming inhabitable, and not just by, you know, those that we ignore, the kind of working classes, the subaltern, as it's often called, but for all of us. And so I think when we think about climate change, it's one of those things that ties in so many different political aspects. We can't think about climate change without thinking about migration. We can't think about climate change without thinking about kind of borders, without thinking about capitalism, neoliberalism, inequality. It brings all these themes together under this very, very scary banner. And kind of going back to my own research on rescue and refuge on the Mediterranean, there is a boat that works on the Mediterranean at the moment that rescues refugees in dinghies. It's called the Louise Michel, and it's sponsored by Banksy, the artist. And this boat is captained by a woman called Pia Klemp, who is amazing. And as a side note, it's very interesting that a lot of these boats are captained by women, again, kind of showing the gender element. But Pia Klemp has challenged this kind of very historically and politically loaded term of SAR, which is often referred to as search and rescue. So whenever there's a humanitarian crisis and we send in people to help or to salvage or to rescue, it's known as an SAR, search and rescue operation. And what Pia Klemp and this boat that currently works on the Mediterranean has done is it's changed that commonly referred to SAR as solidarity and resistance. And I think just by that small change, it's kind of invoking this political element, right? Again, that it's not a natural disaster. There's nothing kind of natural about the world in which we live now, but it is a man-made political crisis. And acknowledging that is perhaps the first step in thinking through our responses to it, right? And so I know that this is very brief, but I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I know we have more speakers, but I think kind of that is something that I've picked up in the sessions I have been able to attend, and from various speakers in many different themes across this conference is how important these two things are. This idea of solidarity, right? Of solidarity across the diaspora and from the continent and also towards the continent, and of resistance, of resisting racism, of resisting kind of institutional oppression. And I think these two themes, SAR, solidarity and resistance, are things that we need to take forward in all of our work. So that is enough for me now.
Enrique, thank you so much for reminding us of the nature of climate change, that it is, if you will, human-made, that we are contributors to why we're in this moment, as opposed to saying it's just something that just sort of happens. No, there is a human factor in all of this. And this whole issue of solidarity and resistance, that is a legacy certainly of people of African descent and of Africa, is very important in this moment as we invite coalitions to come together to address this particular challenge that we face. So thank you for that. And thank you for reminding us that literature also makes a difference, as well as public policy and all of, if you will, the hard data when we're speaking of how we think about issues like this. So thank you for those comments, particularly following Reverend Bakwan with the kind of ministerial background that he brings to this discussion from a theological orientation as well. So we would like to move now to Ms. Woods, and I'd like to say a bit more about my dear colleague, if she will allow me. Ms. Woods, of course, as I said before, is a Pan-African strategist, researcher, advocate. She works on Capitol Hill. We actually do some things together there on advocacy for Africa with the ADNA group. And she also is the senior advisor for a group called SHINE, which also brings together philanthropists, faith, values-driven investors dedicated to financing community-based renewable energy. I love it, it's community-based, but she's also in the structural space as well. She's committed to a feminist leadership and working to co-create SHINE's Energy Access COVID Recovery Fund. She also previously worked at ThoughtWorks, where she led efforts to bring about a robust technology solution to the Ebola crisis. She has also held field positions at the Institute for Policy Studies, Oxfam America, and Interaction. She is an ambassador of African Risings for Justice, Peace, and Dignity, and also serves as a mentor of the Fighters Table, supporting feminist leadership in Black and Brown communities. As I said earlier, she's also someone who's called upon in the media space, from the BBC to NPR to the World Today and other places we could name in this moment. But today she's decided to spend moments with us, and we're delighted to have her. Ms. Woods, the floor is yours.
Reverend Angelique, thank you so much. Thank you to all the organizers of this conference, pivotal legacy that this conference emerges out of and is situated in. And I just want to applaud all of those who made it possible for us to be here today. And to thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel. I feel like I've already, just from my co-panelists, taken so much, and I'm grateful for this discussion and look forward to the dialogue as well. So I just wanted to take a few minutes. The time is going to go quickly, I know, but to just talk about, I often have sort of one foot on each side, and I was hoping to speak about a bit of climate justice and the reality that many of us know that's happening both on the continent and then on this side of the Atlantic and the diaspora as well. And I think we have to hold up this notion that it is systems, it is structures, decisions made about particularly economic, global economy and how the global economy functions that has gotten us to where we are today. It is a global economy that has been really focused on extraction of resources, starting out with human resources from the African continent during the transatlantic slave trade and continuing to natural resources, particularly oil, gas, and mining on the continent, which has driven a global economy that is entirely addicted to fossil fuels. So when we talk about climate change, we've got to understand that it's very much linked to an economic model of exploitation that has marginalized, that has rendered invisible Black, Brown, and Indigenous people across this planet. And so I think what we see are these dramatic impacts of climate crisis. The UN tells us it's 9 more years before the chaos begins of climate catastrophe. But as we know, and we heard so powerfully from the Pacific, it's happening now. So, Liberia, where I'm from, and much of West Africa, particularly all of the coastlines of the African continent, where many of the capital cities sit, it is those areas that are already facing dramatic rise in sea levels that is actually already creating pressures. And you see already communities disappearing under the water today, not 9 or 10 years from now, today. So we have a very real pressure on the land caused by decisions made for the global economy that have been really exploiting our communities throughout the globe. So what you see already, it's the flooding in East Africa, it's the increase of the cyclones and the severe weather in Southern Africa. It is also here in the US, the heat waves that have left people literally dead, unable to survive, right? Increased pressures on the land, making it more and more difficult for particularly smallholder farmers to grow food, to be able to hold on to their land. So when we think about these extreme weather patterns, it is the impact on people that we have to understand. And with increasing melting of the ice on Mount Kilimanjaro, the waters in Lake Chad disappearing, the drought cycles that are increasing throughout the continent, but particularly in the Sahel and the Sahara, the situation is stark. It is those who are most vulnerable that are seeing their lives, their livelihoods, their well-being, their health gravely impacted. Greenhouse gas emissions, often created outside of Africa, outside of communities of African descent, are actually putting those communities in dire risk, in peril. And much of our, if you think about it, causal factors is caused by the extraction of the resources for export elsewhere. It is not for the benefit of those on the continent in those communities, particularly Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. So what we see across the board is increased pressures to be able to even put food on the table. And family, we know this has all been even more exacerbated with the COVID crisis. where the disproportionate impact on our communities without access to vaccines, without access to healthy foods, often leaves us at even greater risk of our health. But we also know that it is our communities where, whether it's the Niger Delta, where the oil started to flow back in 1956, or what is known here in Louisiana and elsewhere as Cancer Alley, where our communities are literally at the doorstep of fossil fuel emitting factories. Our health is in peril. Our water is in peril. Our ability to even have health is at risk. So it is in this context that we say, enough is enough. We recognize all those leaders, including many of you at this conference and around this virtual table, that are holding up an alternative path. We're saying no to fossil fuels. We're pushing for a global divestment from fossil fuels, whether it is philanthropies or insurance companies or bankers or our faith institutions. We recognize the power that we have with our resources, and we understand that we too must take the lead in saying we divest from fossil fuels. And we cannot just stop there, but we must push forward to the other side of the equation. What do we want? What's our vision of what's possible? We know that climate change is impacting lives and livelihoods across the world. And we say there are also opportunities to bring justice, opportunities to bring reparations, opportunities to lift up systems that help our communities not just survive, but thrive. At the core of these regenerative systems is understanding the power of renewable energy that is not only focused on mega projects that lead corporations to have access to power, but renewable energy where can understand their power to use the sun that we have so plentiful, to be able to use the wind that we also have available to us, to say, how do we envision systems that are healthy in our community? Can we have household systems? Can we have irrigation systems? Can we have processing, milling, right? Refrigeration for vaccines that will be life-saving, that are solar powered. This is what is possible. This is what is happening in regions around the planet. We as people of Africa and those of African descent have to be at the forefront, demanding our right to these healthy energy systems, demanding that there is appropriate climate finance that not only reaches our communities, but is controlled by, is led by our communities visioning a healthy future. So it begins with divesting. It begins with investing. It is also recognizing that we must boldly say, now is the time to understand that the oil must be left in the soil. The gas, the coal, all of the fossil fuel extraction that has been our peril has to be ended. We urge the end of financing of all fossil fuel extraction in Africa, point blank. There cannot be a healthy future for the planet or our communities without stopping the financing of fossil fuels, which means that the push to liquefied natural gas has to end. So we must join forces with the bold leaders in Uganda that are standing up against the pipeline being built for the extraction of gas and the movement of that gas outside of Uganda. We must stand with those who are saying no to coal, right? Whether it's in the Lamu community in Kenya or elsewhere on the continent where we recognize that coal is the problem and cannot be part of a solution going forward. We must also link hands with those, particularly those in the diaspora, that are also fighting back against the fossil fuel companies and their destruction in their communities. So
Thank you so much, Ms. Woods.
towards a Green New Deal for the world that will be a zero carbon economy, that will end greenhouse gas emissions, that will support and invest in smallholder farmers and all that they're doing for local production that is agroecology, bringing healthy foods to our communities, not fossil fuel induced fertilizers or genetically modified agriculture. We can do this. And in this run up to the COP, we say nothing short of a 1.5 degrees Celsius rise will work for our planet or its people. We cannot continue to cook our continent or the diaspora. Now is the time to change, and we just applaud all those who have created a space to demand that change from our communities to the policymakers to the world. Now is the time for change. Justice must be ours. Environmental justice, economic justice, climate justice, now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Woods. What a powerful presentation of the issues, the urgency of the issue, which I think all of our speakers are speaking into, that the time is now. COP26 is happening, but more than that, our communities matter, and that we must find ways to come together to speak out boldly in this moment. Now we have just a bit of time left to bring in our speaker we were trying to bring in earlier to speak into this moment as well. We would like to bring him in to give us some reflections. Mr. Gonzalo Mena Vasquez, he comes from Colombia. It's so important to have the Latin American perspective as well. He deals with environmental and natural resources as an administrator, hired teaching specialist, and he also is a magister in law, has a master's in law and environmental education, and also the doctorate degree in education as well. So it is my joy to bring him on. My hope is that his technology is working now. So can we hear from you? The floor is yours. We do hope your technology is working. Thank you.
Bueno, muy buen día para todos. ¿Me escuchan? Es grato para mí. Qué pena, pues, el tema de la tecnología, pero desde Cali, Colombia, un abrazo fuerte y decirle que los quiero mucho, que estoy orgulloso, pues, de estar aquí en esta conferencia, ¿sí? Sobre el cambio climático y el tema, pues, del panafricanismo. Pues ya sobra, pues, la presentación. Soy de Puerto Tejada, doctor en educación, y bueno, desde América Latina decirle que acá tenemos una diversidad biológica grande, tenemos un rico el cambio climático, lo que ustedes han explicado, pues igual la situación acá en Latinoamérica, el incremento de los océanos, la muerte de animales, del oxígeno, en los mares. Bueno, no escapamos de esa realidad y bueno, invitar pues desde el desarrollo de estrategias globales a las actividades económicas sustentables desde una ética y una moral afro, digámoslo así, con políticas públicas de gobierno que se adapten al cambio climático, al manejo de bosques, a trabajar bien el tema de los recursos genéticos, el ecoturismo, y bueno, saludar a todos los panafricanos hermanos de de toda Latinoamérica, como es Panamá, todo lo que tiene que ver con Costa Rica. Y bueno, por el tiempo, pues, recordar a los panafricanistas que nos han antecedido y que nos han invitado a la unidad política y espiritual, como William, Silvestre, todos ellos que nos han invitado a trabajar una ecología espiritual centrada pues en el amor y que desde esos escenarios ambientales mundiales que no nos han escuchado ni nos han dado pues la importancia que merecemos como africanos, como pueblo que necesitamos salir de la pobreza y de mejorar nuestras condiciones, recordar también al panafricanista que no se dio cuenta, a Manuel Zapata Oliveira, colombiano, líder pues de los asuntos afro, que nos invitó siempre a trabajar el tema de las culturas nuestras, como son la cultura yoruba, la cultura bantú, desde el saber muntú, y invitar a todas a que trabajemos la pedagogía espiritual, apoyando a nuestras mujeres desde sus intenciones ecofeministas, ¿sí? Ellas que son nuestra madre tierra, que nos dan la vida, que trabajan por mejorar el medio ambiente, por salir de la pobreza, nosotros los afros, y bueno, trabajar fuertemente todas esas iniciativas que ustedes han planteado desde un conversatorio comunitario universal, panafricano, que sigamos trabajando para salir desde esas dificultades que tenemos, por ejemplo, acá en Colombia, que estamos totalmente, están haciendo los movimientos afros, tienen dificultad. Bueno, agradecer a la doctora Maricel Mena, panafricana también, que trabaja el tema espiritual fuerte y directora de mi tesis doctoral. Un abrazo grande, pues gracias por la invitación y bueno, decir eso, no sé si el tiempo, pues como usted lo dice, ya está pues casi agotado, pero nuevamente saludarlos y decirles que mucho amor y un abrazo para todos desde Colombia y que me disculpen el tema de la tecnología.
No, we want to thank you very much for your persistence and your faithfulness to stay with us and to extend such wonderful, warm greetings to all of us, in particular as we think about people like Dr. Sylvester, who was there at the earliest days of the Pan-African Congresses, coming from the regions of Latin America and the Caribbean and those areas. So thank you so much for your warm greetings. I want to come back very, very quickly to Reverend Bakwan to say just a little bit about, unfortunately, in addition to the extractions and all of the issues that have been named so well in this forum, this whole issue of nuclear testing that also goes on, that also further compromises this issue. Can you just very quickly, in short order, say a word about that? And then I think, unfortunately, we'll probably have to end it there. Reverend Bakwan, please.
Thank you so much, Angelique. And, you know, this is just an example of the ongoing issues of reparations across many of our communities around the world. And, you know, you've had these conversations within the African people of African descent gatherings. Basically, we can say that since the end of World War II, so from 1946 to 1996, the US, UK, and France tested enough nuclear weapons to be the equivalent of 9,010 Hiroshima atomic bombs. So that's around 135,000 tons of TNT. And this was not in, you know, just in the atmosphere. These were on inhabited islands and inhabited atolls, where thousands and thousands of people are now affected by the radiation from those tests in Maui, French Polynesia, in Kiristimati, and the Kiribati Islands, also affected by climate change. Micronesia, also affected by climate change. Australia, and the Bikini Atoll by the US government, and of course in the ocean. And we still have the lingering effects of that in terms of the damage to the environment, the damage to the ecosystems of our oceans, which is the source of food for so many, the fishing basket of the world even. And so while we are facing generations of illnesses and issues as a result of this nuclear testing, while we still face a lack of acknowledgement of the strong disasters that took place from these. And we are about to see Mururoa Atoll in Tahiti, that beautiful place that we all love to talk about and want to go to near Bora Bora and all of that. That atoll is about to crack open and unleash its nuclear waste from the testing into the ocean. The ocean currents will take that not just into the Pacific, but into the Indian Ocean, the African Atlantic. All of our oceans will suffer as a result. And so we're talking still about the issue of reparations, whether it is for slavery, the issue of reparations for the nuclear testing and its impact on people, and of course now reparations in the context of climate justice. So we can see an ongoing issue of these countries who have been at the forefront of impacting our people all over the world, refusing to accept responsibility. And if they do not accept responsibility on climate change, how can they accept responsibility on the issue of nuclear testing and the issue of reparations for slavery as well? So this is a serious issue that we're facing, and it's being exacerbated by climate change. Thank you so
Reverend
much, Angela.
Bhagwan, thank you so much for giving that context, further definition as to how it affects climate change issues. The Pacific is so important to this discussion, and we're so grateful that you are here to help explain the other dynamics related to climate change. So to Ms. Woods, to Ms. Brieke, to Reverend Bhagwan, and also Dr. Vasquez, we thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our time, but please, everyone, there will be a closing. I'm going to turn it over now to the moderator for the day. Thank you, everyone, for being with us for this discussion. Stay right where you are. The next moderator is coming to close out our time together.